actually here today to talk about what it's like raising a child on the autistic spectrum. But before I do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Yes, I'm a writer, and actually I only write because it's cheaper than therapy. I've written about everything that's ever happened to me. I wrote my first book at 17 about growing up as a surfy girl in Australia. Have any of you been out there? Because Australian men disprove the theory of evolution. They're evolving into apes. And as an example of how sexist they were, they used to get us to cut their names out in paper, sticky tape them to our stomachs, and then sunbake so we get a tan tattoo in the shape of their name. So if ever I get cancer, I'll have a melanoma called Bruce. I'll have to have like a brucectomy to get rid of it. They also were the sort of guys who thought sex drive meant doing it in the car. But I finally worked out why. You know that little sign on the rear vision mirror that says, objects in this mirror may appear larger than they are. I thought, right, got it. You know, I've written about being a single girl in Sydney and trying to find a man who wasn't married or gay, or married and gay, or who just didn't think monogamy was something you might make dining room tables out of. That would have been quite good. I've written about aging, I've written about cosmetic surgery. Have any of you been to LA? Okay, there's no law of gravity in Los Angeles. It's amazing. Skin sags upwards. And basically, you know, all they do in cosmetic surgery is drag everything up. So the ankle becomes the knee becomes the navel, the clitoris becomes the chin. And that's how you spot a recipient of cosmetic surgeries. Look for a woman who's rubbing that part of anatomy a little bit too vigorously. I mean, I'm really against cosmetic surgery. My mother told me never to pick my nose, especially from a catalogue. Ha ha. I've written about pregnancy, and I've written about childbirth, where you have to stretch a vagina the customary 5 kilometres. I mean, there's a lot of young women here. I'll just tell you the 2 things you need to know. Don't have the epidural, because crapping on the obstetrician is the ultimate revenge, yes? And when the doctor's doing the episiotomy, just ask him to keep on sewing, because you don't want anything going in there or coming out of there ever again. I've written about what comes after that, the horrors of motherhood, you know, because there's the cracked nipples, the constipation, the mountains of hemorrhoids. Edmund Hillary couldn't scale those bastards. But no matter how bad it gets, as the mother, you know, you're tethered by the breast. You're a 24-hour catering service. You are Meals on Heels. Then there's the sleep deprivation, the sex deprivation, although, you know, after you've had a baby, I don't think you really want to have sex. I think a woman's favourite position, a new mother, her favourite position is the doggy position, where he begs and you just roll over and play dead. I've written a lot about marriage, because I think love prepares you for marriage the way, I don't know, needlepoint prepares you for round-the-world solo yachting. And for my generation, I think it was particularly hard, because we thought we were going to be the generation who had it all, and we've just ended up doing it all. I mean, even though women make up 50% of the workforce, we're probably doing, what would you say, girls, 99% of all the housework and all the childcare. And I had this argument with my own husband all the time. I'm like, you've got to help me more around the house. And he's like, well, I'd like to help, but I'm a man and I can't multitask. This is the ultimate biological cop-out. Can you imagine any man having any trouble multitasking at an orgy? He would have no trouble at that particular time. It doesn't wash. And, you know, I do all my research in a very scientific, in-depth fashion over cappuccinos with girlfriends. And I know that women of my generation are not having sex with their husbands. And it's basically that they're exhausted, you know. When you've worked all day and then you come home at night and defrost the chops and find the lost sports kit and put the cat out and help with the homework and cook the dinner and iron the shirts, by the time you get into bed, the one thing you're fantasizing about is sleep. And then you get the hand and you think, oh, not the hand. You know, men make horror movies called The Blob and The Thing. Women would make the hand, you know. And here's this guy who hasn't spoken to you all day and he thinks you're in the mood for love. You're in the mood for running him through with a carving knife, you know. He's prodding away at your clitoris as though he's running late for a meeting, you know, and waiting for the elevator. And you're like, just take the stairs, please. So, yeah, I've written a lot about that. I've written about trying to, oh, I have got a good sex tip for you girls, actually. If you want to get out of sex with your partner, just when you feel the prod of his penis in the back, tell him the tax department rang and want to audit his accounts, because not only does he lose the urge for sex, but he won't be able to sleep, so no snoring either. Result! Good one. Yeah. Yeah, so I've written about raising my teenage daughter. Are there any mothers here, teenage daughters? It's like living with the Taliban, isn't it? You're not allowed to laugh, sing, dance, wear short skirts. When I go out, I have to creep down the front door like that, you know, and I go, "Urgh." If she hears me, she runs after me. She goes, "What are you wearing? Go back to your room. You're not going out dressed like that." I think teenage daughters are God's punishment for having sex in the first place. But I have got a good survival tip for you too, actually. Next time your daughter's just hitting you and kicking you and saying, "I wish you'd just die," just take a big drag on a cigarette, big gulp of wine and say, "I'm doing my best, darling." But the reason I'm telling you all these things is to show you that I'm actually a very, very candid person. But the one thing I had never written about or spoken about in public is the fact that I have a child on the autistic spectrum, mainly because I didn't want to invade his privacy. But when I started writing my 13th novel, it was going to be a satire on the sex war, and these other books started pouring out of my pen. I don't know if there's any writers here, but when that happens to you, you just can't stop writing. So I thought, well, okay, I'll publish the book, but I'll let it stand on its own two literary legs, and I won't mention the fact that I have a child on the spectrum. But then a journalist asked me, was it true that I had a child with autism? And I thought, well, I'm not going to lie. If I lie, it looks as though I'm embarrassed, when of course the opposite is true. I'm so proud of him. So I asked him what to do, and he was 21 then, last year. And he loves the book. It's called The Boy Who Fell to Earth, and he sees it as a celebration of idiosyncrasies, eccentricities, and being different. So with his permission, I very tentatively started talking about it, and I'm so glad I did, because, you know, I've had letters from other parents all around the world saying that they're pleased I've put into words what their lives are like, because, you know, trying to cope on your own when you have a child with special needs is as effective as standing up to, I don't know, Voldemort with a butter knife. You know, you do need that support. I don't know if any of you know about autism, but in case you don't, it's a lifelong neurological condition chiefly characterised by an inability to communicate, often chronic OCD and anxiety disorders, and also a very high IQ. Raising a child like this, there is no owner's manual. You know, I sometimes feel as though I found my son under a spaceship and I'm just kind of, you know, raising him as my own. It's like trying to put together a giant jigsaw puzzle without the benefit of that coloured picture on the front of the box. And my own son, you know, he was so smart when he was born. He walked early, talked early, everything. And then at about 14 months, it was like his computer crashed. He lost his language, he just went inside himself. And I got the diagnosis of autism when he was 3 years old. And I remember sitting in one of those old Victorian sooty hospitals in London. And when the doctor said the word autism, I mean, that's like a cold knife slicing straight into your heart. I mean, that's a diagnosis that drags you down into the dark. And here's my beautiful boy, and suddenly he's become like a little wilted plant in a gloomy room. And, you know, I just thought it's my job to drag him into the light. And as a mother, I don't think there's any other parents here who have children with special needs, but as a mum, you know, the first thing you do, you go into denial. I mean, I bankrupted myself seeing every expert in the country. I tried everything from cranial massage to karma maintenance, whatever. I hate to think how many doctors' children I've now put through university. And then, as a mum, of course, your guilt gland throbs. I'm thinking, was it something I ate? Was it something I drank? Was it that one glass of wine in the final trimester? I kept thinking, you know, if only I'd feng shuied my aura like Gwyneth Paltrow and Organic Co., you know, he'd be all right. Then you go through kind of the why me's and you get a bit bitter, cynical and twisted for a while. And then finally, you just think to yourself, well, this is the unique little person I've been given and I've got to do my best by them. Now that my son's 21, I honestly think there's no such thing as normal and abnormal. I think there's ordinary and extraordinary. And children on the autistic spectrum, people on the autistic spectrum, are truly unique. I mean, they have a literal, lateral, sort of tangential logic, which can be sort of disarmingly charming. I mean, even when he was 4 and he got his language back after a lot of speech therapy, the experts were saying to me, you know, he was mentally handicapped and he'd probably end up living in an institution. But at home, he was saying the most interesting things to me. I remember I was chopping onions in the kitchen one day and he said to me, "Mum, if onions make you cry, are there vegetables that make you happy?" I thought, great question. And then, the next day he said to me, "Mum, what's the speed of dark?" And I mean, he's been constantly asking me these questions I can't answer. But it's also that sort of quirky behaviour that makes it very socially isolating as a parent. I used to call and when we go to the park, I used to call the sandbox the quick sandbox, because as soon as my son did anything vaguely erratic or out of the usual, you know, other parents would take their children away as though my child had some kind of leprosy-like contagion, and they'd glare at me as though I was a bad mother. And it gets really painful too when your child is in their teens and all your friends' children, they're going on their gap year, you know, they're climbing Everest, they're going down the Amazon, they've got, you know, work experience in top barristers' chambers. It's like being at an incredible banquet and you can smell the aroma wafting out and you're standing outside sort of starving with your nose pressed up against the glass. The other really difficult thing is schooling. Oh gosh, you know, I think getting help is a postcode lottery, and the government sets up bureaucratic speed bumps to stop a parent's progress. I mean, I put my child into a mainstream school because the waiting list for special needs schools, I mean, there are Stone Age families at the front, those waiting lists are so long. But putting a child with special needs into a mainstream school, I think, is as pointless as giving a fish a bath. I mean, most kids at school are striving to learn math and grammar. If you have a child with autism, they're striving to make themselves invisible. The bullying is out of control. I mean, 60% of children with autism, people with autism, say they were severely bullied at school, as opposed to 11% of the general population. And when he was about 9, my son came home with a sign sticky taped on his back saying, "Kick me, I'm a retard." And his eyes are full of tears and he's saying, "Mum, the kids called me a retard. Am I a retard, Mum?" I mean, hello, you might as well just take my heart out of my chest, throw it on the ground and jump all over it. And of course, what happens when you have a child who gets bullied a lot? I mean, once he was beaten up so badly he had to have stitches in his head when he was about 10. You get very overprotective. I mean, even now, my son is 22. I never let him go out the door without a list of instructions longer than War and Peace, and enough in his backpack to set up a comfortable wilderness homestead. And you can understand why. But it's not all doom and gloom, because the other thing about raising a child on the spectrum is they're hilarious. They don't have any filter. I mean, they're very candid. They say whatever they're thinking, which means that socially, you know, I sweat more than Paris Hilton doing a Sudoku because I never know what he's going to say, you know. Like, I took him to a charity event at Downing Street when he was about 11 or 12, and I introduced him to Tony Blair, and my son just looked at him and said, "Oh yes, you're the one my mother calls Tony blah, blah, blah." And I'm going, ha, 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 you know, what can I say? And then I took him to this other function where Anne Widdecombe was there, and he said to Anne Widdecombe, "My mother says you're two-faced, but if so, why are you wearing that one when it's all wrinkly and crinkly and old?" And you know, I don't want to go for gold in the name-dropping Olympics, but I have to tell you the name of this famous actor I had for dinner once, just so you understand the true horror of the scenario. I had Hugh Jackman for dinner. It was just before he got really famous, and I'm flirting for Britain. I mean, he's gorgeous, girls, isn't he? You've got to swim through a pool of your own drool to get to that. That man gives me a wide-on. Anyway, I'm flirting away like mad, and then and we're getting on so well. In my mind, we've already eloped and we're living in the Caribbean, right? And then my son came home, and he was 13, and I jumped up and hugged him and said, "Oh, look, Jules, you're growing a moustache." And he just looked at me and said, "So are you, Mum. Look at all those hairs on your top lip, and there's quite a few on your chin as well." And I'm thinking, is it too late to put him back in the condom vending machine, you know, for the refund? So, yes, I mean, but the hard thing, oh yes, I was going to say the other thing about them being very candid, while that's quite funny, it can be dangerous too, because of this lack of filter. And I remember we were walking in a really dodgy part of London once, and it was getting dark, and I was just thinking, oh, we shouldn't have come this way. And this big hairy biker was walking towards me with tats and piercings, and I was thinking, oh God, we'll just scurry past quietly. Well, Jules was about 14. He stopped him, pulled on the elbow of his leather jacket and said, "Excuse me, sir, but has anyone ever told you that your chin looks like upside down testicles?" And I'm like, who is this child and why is he calling me mother, you know? And, you know, once we were going out, my daughter and I were going out, and I said to Jules, well, you know, if you go out, lock the door and lock the window because I don't want burglars stealing my jewellery. And when I get home, door open, window open. I said, why didn't you lock the door? What about burglars stealing my jewellery? And he just looked at me and said, why would men want jewellery? It's a logic, it's from a different planet, but, you know, it is a logic. But, you know, I think my child, even though I find him to be Wikipedia with a pulse. I mean, he's so, so clever, but he's very, very quirky. And this trouble is only 15% of people with autism are in the workforce because people find them, that people are too judgmental about them. And we now know with diagnostic hindsight that Mozart and Einstein and Van Gogh and Orwell and all these amazing virtuosic musicians and scientists were probably on the autistic spectrum. Although my son hates me saying that. He's always like, the pressure to be a genius, you know. But in the cutbacks, with a scramble for funds, people with less obvious disabilities, I mean, they don't have a white stick or a walking stick or a wheelchair or anything, are losing out. And they really do deserve our love and support and encouragement because they could contribute to society in the most fascinating way if we could just give them a chance. And my son often says to me he feels as though he's drowning in one of his own brain waves. So I'm hoping this book I've written can act as a small literary life raft. And just to end on something funnier, there's nothing wrong with being different. I mean, I think I've earned my whole living from being candid. I mean, even the other day, I was at the Royal Polo, and the presenter said, the guy was organising the event, so would I like to present the cups to the princes? So I'm standing there next to the organiser. I said, what do I have to do? And he said, we just present the cup, kiss them on the cheek, and then they'll be fine. So I could see the two princes are standing there in their little polo teams, and I could see Prince William walking towards me, and he looked really bored. So I thought, well, being candid, I'd have a little bit of fun. So I said to him, apparently I have to kiss you. Do you want tongue? And Prince William went, oh, perhaps later. And then he went back and told the others, you know, and Prince Harry came out and said, do you want tongue? And he's like, oh yeah! You know, and he picked me up and swung me around. I rode him around the paddock, and you know, I felt a real frisson with him, I did. And he's still single, so if I play my cards right, you know, I could be a future member of the royal family. Then I'll be on a postage stamp and getting licked all day. That's what I call job satisfaction. So yes, it would be very boring if we were all the same, a case of the bland leading the bland. So I think if you meet someone on the autistic spectrum, give them a chance because they are unique and wonderful people. Thank you.